All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Mind Matters, Navigating Head Injuries and Concussions. I'm Kylie Como. I'm the legal nurse consultant with Shane Smith Law. And today we're speaking with Dr. Robert Bashuk with the Concussion Center. Dr. Bashuk, it's wonderful to see you.
It's great to be here, and I really appreciate you guys doing this.
Very welcome. Very welcome. Well, I know we've got a lot of great content coming up. Can't wait to hear about the Concussion Center and all the amazing work you're doing. So let me just head right into some questions here. So let's get real basic. What type of concussions would you say you all see typically at the Concussion Center?
So at the Concussion Center, we see all types of concussion. We see motor vehicle accidents, we see assaults, we see slip and falls, and we see sports concussions as well. So anytime somebody is suspected of having a concussion or has had a concussion, we're able to take care of all of that.
The full spectrum, it sounds like. That's a great thing to know, great resource. So traumatic brain injury, right? So TBI, we'll refer to it as TBI, sits on a sort of continuum. So can you kind of explain what the TBI continuum is and where does a concussion fall on that continuum?
So basically, the traumatic brain injury, there are three types. There's mild, moderate, and severe. And concussion, another name for concussion, is mild traumatic brain injury. Even though it is called mild traumatic brain injury, I don't agree with that. It can be quite severe, but that is currently the medical literature that a mild traumatic brain injury is a concussion. When you take all comers, a mild traumatic brain injury represents about 80 to 90% of all of the traumatic brain injuries. So, moderate to severe, much fewer than mild traumatic brain injuries, but they are certainly can be quite devastating.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think mild traumatic brain injury, I know you got to kind of stratify things, but that is somewhat of a misnomer because there are such long-lasting, devastating effects that I know you're going to get into in a little bit. So let's kind of back things up a little bit. Tell me, just define a concussion for our audience.
So basically, a concussion is a traumatic brain injury. It's due to a direct blow to either the head, neck, or body, and that results in an impulsive force being transmitted to the brain. It initiates what we call a neurotransmitter or metabolic cascade, and this results in possible damage to the axons, which are the wires of the nerves. It also can cause blood flow change, and one of the big changes is what's called neuroinflammation. And neuroinflammation is a big cause of the symptoms that we see with the concussion. To further the definition, signs and symptoms tend to occur immediately, but it can be delayed for minutes to hours, sometimes even longer. They often will resolve in a few days, but sometimes it is prolonged. And that definition actually comes from the consensus statement on concussion in sport. I changed it a little bit because, a concussion is a concussion, regardless of whether it's a sport concussion, whether it's a motor vehicle accident or assault or a slip or fall. A concussion is a concussion and they're treated the same way. I like their definition. I usually just take out the word sport because, at that conference, they're dealing with sport concussion, but we deal with concussions, all types of concussions that we discussed earlier.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction to make. I mean, regardless of the mechanism by which you receive a concussion, the presentation is what it is. So I think that's a fair estimation. So one thing, I run into a lot is being in healthcare is people that, and I'm not throwing anybody under the bus. We have all done it. The internet is great, but it can provide some ill-advised information. So let's talk about some myths that might be associated with concussions.
I think there are 8 big myths that we see almost every single day. And number 8 is going to be the biggest, but I'm going to go through all 8 of them because I think they're all important. So the first one is you don't have to be knocked out to have a concussion. And actually about 90% of the people that we see are not knocked out. So a lot of people will come in, well, I wasn't knocked out, so I didn't have a concussion. Well, you very likely could have had a concussion. If you hit your head today and you don't have symptoms until tomorrow, again, that's not a concussion, but it could be a concussion concussion. So the symptoms may not occur for a couple of days, actually. You have to hit your head to have a concussion. Well, if you go back to the definition that we went through just a second ago, the traumatic brain injury is due to a direct blow to the head, neck, or body. Okay, so you don't have to hit your head to have a concussion. Typically, like in a motor vehicle accident, it's acceleration, deceleration is what causes the concussion. In football, a guy can have a really big hit to his body or to his neck, and that can cause a concussion. You always see stars when you have a concussion. Well, actually, most people actually don't see stars, but some people do. So again, if you do see stars, that's certainly consistent with a concussion. But if you don't see stars, it doesn't mean that you didn't have a concussion. And then concussion's not an actual brain injury. Well, we already just talked about it. It's considered the term is a mild traumatic brain injury, and we don't have to go over why we don't like that term, but that is what we have to deal with. There are blood tests and brain imaging tools that'll diagnose a concussion. That is not correct. MRIs, CAT scans are always normal with concussion. If they do show abnormalities, they're either pre-existing abnormalities, or if there are abnormalities, then that's going to be considered a moderate or severe traumatic brain injury. And again, there are some blood tests, but they are not ready for prime time. And really, the blood tests are really actually FDA approved to determine whether somebody should have a CAT scan in the emergency room rather than to actually diagnose a concussion. Number 7, which is one of the big myths, is there's no treatment for concussion, when actual fact there's treatment for all aspects of concussion. It's a very multifaceted approach, and it's determined by the phenotype of the concussion, which is what are the symptoms that person is having. But the biggest myth, the absolute biggest myth, and the one that's most difficult to deal with, is that rest until symptoms resolve. That is just an absolute myth. There's never been proof that's been of any benefit. I like to say what you resist persists. Inactivity breeds inactivity. The longer you're out, the longer it takes to return. The treatment for concussion is exercise, and the exercise has to be done in a very special way. And that exercise is done with either the Buffalo Concussion Treadmill Test or the Buffalo Concussion Bike Test. And this is a test that we do in our office. And this helps. One of the big issues with concussion is autonomic nervous system dysfunction that occurs after the concussion. And this is one of the big reasons why people will have headaches and dizziness and memory, anxiety, irritability, sleep issues, fatigue. And when you correct the autonomic nervous system dysfunction with what's called subsymptom threshold aerobic exercise, also known as the Buffalo Concussion Treadmill or the Buffalo Concussion Bike Test, then that corrects those symptoms and people improve dramatic. And that is one of our mainstays of treatment is the Buffalo Concussion Treadmill and Buffalo Concussion Bike Test. And basically, this is out of the University of Buffalo. It has nothing to do with going to Wyoming and running after buffaloes, but that's where it was developed. And this is now, as far as I'm concerned, the standard of care for improvement. We do it in our office. We determine what the heart rate needs to be at. And then what we do is we show that person actually how to do the treadmill or bike test. And they can choose. If most people choose treadmill, but fair number still do want to do the bike as well. And we're good either way. We have treadmills and a bike in our office. So we have that person show up at our office dressed to exercise with tennis shoes, sweatpants, t-shirt. They can wear whatever they want, but they're dressed to exercise. When they get on the treadmill, you only walk, you don't run. We do adjust the incline, and that we get the heart rate to where we want it to be. We determine what their exercise tolerance is. And then once that's done, then we show them how to do the test. They go home and they do it 4 to 5 times a week. 6 or 7 times a week is even better. And again, you'll end up doing it anywhere from 1 to 4 months. It kind of depends. It could be a little longer. It depends on when the concussion was. If we get somebody who's early, so let's say within a couple of weeks, they may end up doing the treadmill test for maybe 4 to 6 weeks. If somebody, it's been 2 years, well, it may take them longer. It may take them 4 to 6 months, but the treadmill test will help correct the autonomic nervous system dysfunction, regardless of whether it's an acute event within the last few weeks or if it's been a chronic event. And so many people show up and they've been told by medical professionals that they need to rest. And then I have to try to convince them that rest is the absolute wrong thing to do, that what you do to get better is you have to exercise. And that is a very big part of what we do here.
So much great information you just laid out. So, you know, a lot of myths. You dispelled, I think, a lot of the biggest ones that I know I've heard from patients in the past. But, the thing that kind of stuck out the most to me there, the overarching theme, if you will, is not all providers are geared up for that. That's why we have specialists, right? Primary care or even neurologists have specialties, right? So you want to make sure that you're seeing the right kind of provider, or that if you're talking to primary care, that you're asking about that. Am I seeing the right kind of medical provider to treat or even diagnose this, correct?
That is correct. And I'd like to add something to that. The most effective tool for someone to improve is to see a healthcare professional who is trained and understands concussion and understands the proper way it should be treated. Because if there is misinformation, if somebody's told to rest, that just prolongs the symptom.
Yeah.
And so seeing a healthcare professional, regardless of who it is, that understands what needs to be done, that is when you get that misinformation, that just prolongs recovery. So it's really important. The sooner you see somebody that knows what they're talking about, the quicker that person's going to recover.
Yeah, 100% agree. I certainly do appreciate that endorsement for sure. So you mentioned a few things, early in our talk about, kind of the mechanisms of the injury and you mentioned something, the acceleration, deceleration effect, right? So I want to talk about, kind of expound on that a little bit. How does concussion occur? What happens to the brain in order to sustain a concussion?
So I think it's really important that people understand that concussion is actually a temporary energy deficit, and it's the result of acceleration, deceleration. So basically, this temporary energy deficit lasts for approximately 3 to 6 weeks, and then the concussion is actually over with. Now, a person may go on to have persistent post-concussion symptoms, but the actual acute concussion is usually 3 to 6 weeks. And basically what happens is there's the event, there's the trauma, okay? Whether it is a slip and fall, whether it is a getting tackled or getting assaulted, whatever the trauma is, this sets up what's a neurometabolic cascade. And basically what happens is there's just electrical chaos. And what I mean by electrical chaos, there's just sudden firing of neurons throughout the brain, and the neurons do not like that. They fire in an orderly fashion. So when you lift up your right arm, the left side of the brain sends a signal to that right arm to move, not the whole brain, just the nerves that have to do with the right arm. But with a concussion, there's this massive firing of neurons, and this causes the chaos. This is why someone looks dumbfounded, why they stumble, why they're confused. And this causes there's what we call a depolarization of the neurons, and then that is followed by neuronal depression. And that neuronal depression is the result of an energy deficit, and that lasts 3 to 6 weeks. It takes the brain about 3 to 6 weeks to correct itself. And basically what happens when you say a temporary energy deficit, ATP is the chemical in our body and every single cell that allows us to do everything. For me to speak, for you and I to look at each other, for you to get up and walk, that requires ATP in our cells to provide us with that energy. And what happens there's this metabolic process where a chemical called glutamate is released, and then there's this calcium influx into the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. That's where ATP is produced. The mitochondria are injured. There's a reduction in ATP, and that lasts for 3 to 6 weeks. And that's why a person feels tired. They have memory problems. They have brain fog. And that's the basic process from a neurometabolic cascade. And then when that happens, the axons, the wires of the nerves can be damaged. You can get disruption of what's called the blood-brain barrier, and you can get, and I mentioned this earlier, is neuroinflammation. And when you get neuroinflammation, then that causes so many of the symptoms that people get with a concussion.
When you spell it out like that, when you get down to that kind of micro level, it sounds pretty terrifying, and certainly I think highlights on why it's such a serious thing and should be taken seriously. A concussion, even a mild traumatic brain injury or concussion like we're talking about here, all that occurs with a mild traumatic brain injury. So, and I like that you mentioned that term electrical chaos. I've seen and read that before, but thanks for the breakdown of that. Okay, well, that does it for another episode of Mind Matters, Navigating Head Injuries and Concussions. Thank you, Dr. Bashuk, once again for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us today. So to our amazing audience, please remember, like and subscribe to our channel and stay up to date on our latest and greatest content. Hit that bell for notifications. And as always, remember, if you're in pain, call Shane at 980-999-9999.
In pain, so I call Shane. 980-999-9999. In pain, call Shane.